On June 30th, 2025, something historic happened. Canada exported its first ever shipment of liquefied natural gas directly to Asia, breaking over 3 decades of complete reliance on U.S. pipelines. This wasn't just a new trade route. It was a declaration of energy independence launched just weeks after Trump slapped a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian imports, and a targeted 10% on energy specifically. In response, a wave of Buy Canadian, Boycott American swept across the country. By February, 91% of Canadians said reducing dependence on the U.S. was their top national priority, more unifying than any political issue since the pandemic. Then came the global shock. In April, as markets spiraled from Trump's erratic tariff threats, Canada made its move. It didn't wait for stability, it sailed right into the storm. The first LNG vessel departed British Columbia, not as a business transaction, but as a strategic break signal that Canada was done playing second fiddle. So why now? Why risk everything in the middle of a financial storm? Because the bigger risk was staying dependent on a partner who had already turned economic pressure into a political weapon. If you're interested in what's really happening behind the scenes of the global economy, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. In 2024, Canada was exporting over $8 billion worth of natural gas per day, almost entirely to the United States. For decades, it worked. The pipelines flowed south, the money came back north, and the system seemed stable. But that illusion shattered when Washington turned energy into leverage. Trump's new tariffs didn't just raise prices, they wrecked competitiveness. Canadian gas suddenly became too expensive to lock in new long-term deals. Contracts were stalled, negotiations frozen, and futures markets rattled. Worse than the economic damage was the strategic exposure. A G7 nation found itself cornered economically hostage to a single customer whose policies could shift overnight. And in that moment, the risks of putting all your energy through one pipeline became painfully clear. LNG Canada wasn't born out of ambition, it was born out of necessity. Still with us? That probably means this topic matters to you. A like and a quick subscribe goes a long way, and the most revealing part is still ahead. That's where LNG Canada came in, not as a short-term fix, but as a full-scale strategic transformation that redefined Canada's energy future. Built in Kitimat, British Columbia, and backed by a coalition of global players including Shell, Petronas, Mitsubishi, PetroChina, and Korea Gas, this CAD $40 billion megaproject represents the single largest private sector investment in Canadian history. It wasn't just about building a terminal, it was about building a bridge to the next era of energy geopolitics. At its core is state-of-the-art cryogenic technology, which cools natural gas to 165 degrees, reducing its volume by 600 times and allowing it to be shipped across oceans economically. That turns landlocked gas fields into global supply points, breaking the geographic limitations that once tethered Canada to a single buyer, the United States. But the real innovation is in the logistics. The LNG produced in Kitimat can be shipped directly to Asia without relying on congested or politically sensitive routes like the Panama Canal. The Pacific Gateway cuts delivery times in half from 20 days to just 10 to key demand centers in Yokohama, Busan, and Singapore. That's not just a cost advantage, it's a strategic one. And this is just phase one. With an initial capacity of 14 million tons per year, the facility already positions Canada as a serious contender in the global LNG arena. But plans are in motion to double that capacity to 28 million tons, potentially placing Canada among the world's top 5 LNG exporters, alongside Qatar, the United States, and Australia. More than a project, LNG Canada is a pivot point. It severs the country's dependence on U.S. pipeline politics, opens access to premium Asian markets, and sets a foundation for energy exports that are cleaner, faster, and more geopolitically resilient. It's Canada's biggest energy gamble in a generation, and it's already changing the map. That strategic redirection couldn't have come at a better time, because Asia is entering a decade of energy uncertainty and urgent demand growth. Japan, still recovering from the loss of nuclear capacity and facing limited domestic energy options, is bracing for a supply crunch. Starting in 2026, it will require an additional 20 million tons of LNG annually just to maintain current economic momentum. South Korea is responding to similar pressures by planning a 50% expansion in LNG storage capacity over the next decade. It's not just about growth, it's about security, seasonal resilience, and geopolitical risk management. China, moving faster than either of its neighbors, has already locked in multiple long-term LNG deals to preempt winter shortages. With industrial recovery and urban heating needs surging, Beijing is racing to diversify away from unstable sources and hedge against price volatility triggered by conflict or sanctions. And into this vacuum steps Canada. Unlike supplies from Russia mired in sanctions and diplomatic backlash, or the Middle East, where every shipment carries the shadow of regional conflict, Canadian LNG enters the market with a radically different value proposition. It's stable, it's transparent, and it's politically neutral. Buyers in Tokyo, Seoul, and Shanghai don't just want gas, they want certainty. They want to sign contracts with partners that won't be caught in the next geopolitical crossfire. And Canada, with its clean ESG profile, legal predictability, and Indigenous inclusive model, offers a product that fits not only their energy needs, but also their evolving political and ethical standards. It's not just about tapping into a new region, it's about becoming the supplier that Asia can actually plan its future around. Canada's real competitive edge doesn't just lie in geography or technology, it lies in how it chooses to produce and deliver its energy. Unlike most LNG projects globally, the LNG Canada facility is powered by 100% renewable hydroelectricity. This drastically lowers life cycle emissions and gives it one of the cleanest environmental footprints in the industry. In a world where carbon intensity is now a trade liability, this matters more than ever. Add to that Japanese and American technologies that further minimize methane leakage and CO2 output, and Canada's LNG becomes not just cleaner, but future-proofed against the next wave of environmental regulations. But environmental sustainability is only half the story. The social dimension is equally transformative. Over CAD 5.88 billion in contracts have been awarded to Indigenous-owned businesses and regional companies. And this isn't token inclusion, it's structural. The Haisla Nation, whose land surrounds the terminal site, is a co-owner in the Coastal GasLink pipeline that supplies the LNG. They aren't being consulted after the fact. They're shaping the project from within, with equity and decision-making power. This is ESG done right, not as corporate branding, but as a rethinking of how resource development can uplift communities, protect the environment, and still compete globally. In an era where buyers want more than just molecules, they want values embedded in supply, Canada may have just built the most geopolitically relevant LNG project on the planet. Canada is no longer just a regional energy supplier. It's now a globally sought-after partner in a world desperate for stability and transparency. By shifting from fixed pipelines to flexible seaborne LNG routes, Canada has dramatically reduced its political risk. No longer bound to a single buyer or vulnerable to a single government's trade whims, Canadian energy now moves where it's needed most, on Canada's terms. This pivot gives producers pricing power, geopolitical agility, and far more leverage in long-term contracts. And the advantage isn't just logistical, it's reputational. Canada is positioning itself not through volume alone, but through values. ESG leadership, Indigenous partnership models, political stability, and emissions-conscious production make Canadian LNG a premium product in an increasingly values-driven global market. New projects like Cedar LNG, the first Indigenous majority-owned LNG export facility, and Kasai Lisem's LNG are not just expansions. They're extensions of this new model, cleaner, fairer, and designed to align with the world's shifting priorities. Each project reinforces Canada's new identity, not as a follower of fossil trends, but as a standard setter for responsible energy in the 21st century. Canada isn't just exporting liquefied natural gas, it's exporting trust, stability, and ethical value into a global energy supply chain that's been fractured by war, volatility, and opportunism. The success of LNG Canada represents more than a business win. It's a potential blueprint for the 21st century, A model where clean energy, inclusive development, and national sovereignty are not in conflict, but working together. The question now isn't whether Canada has arrived on the world stage. It's whether it can move fast enough and stay committed long enough to hold its edge as energy giants like Qatar, the US, and Australia scale up their own plays. Canada has made its move. But global energy is a race with no finish line, just constant shifts in who leads and who follows. Will Canada's clean, inclusive approach redefine the rules of the game, or will the old giants catch up and push it back to the margins? Thanks for watching all the way through. If you've got thoughts or questions, drop them in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got more on the way.